Our next speaker writes true blockbusters, a prolific author who created a character nearly 25 years ago that has prevailed and lived to investigate another crime over the course of, I think we're at 20 novels in this series alone. I'm speaking, of course, of the Harry Bosch LAPD detective series, with the titular character aging in real time alongside his global fan base, reflecting our rapidly changing times back to us. There's something so very affecting about reaching the twilight of Harry's career in the latest novel, The Burning Room. What will Harry do next? Australian fans can console themselves with the forthcoming TV series, which SBS will be screening from July. Tonight, Harry's creator is here to share with us the chance sequence of events that started it all. Please welcome Michael Connelly with Life Sentence.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here tonight. Before I start, I just want to say I'm very lucky. One of the perks, I guess, that comes with my job is I get to go to a lot of, I get to travel the world. I go to a lot of festivals, book festivals, author festivals. And you got a really good one here, and so you should really celebrate it and support it. I think the Sydney Writers Festival is the best I've been to because of its location, its diversity, the camaraderie of the writers and readers that come here, the support of the publishers, and I'm very honored to have been invited, and I thank the festival for inviting me and bringing me here. I also thank my publisher, Allen and Unwin. It's really weird. I'm working on, I think it's my 27th novel. And, you know, so I make my living making it up, and then they told me I had to come out and tell a true story. And it feels like I've been hiding behind false stories for most of my adult life. And so I've been waffling on what to tell because I wasn't sure what to tell, all week. And I'm really happy the lights are so bright, I think I'm talking to myself. Anyway, I thought I'd tell a story. I just called it this today when I decided this is what I'd tell it. My moment of clarity. It wasn't the moment I knew I wanted to be the writer, but it was the moment I knew how to write, or I knew what I needed to do to write. I guess it was kind of late. I decided when I was 19 years old that I wanted to be a writer. Not only that, but more specifically, I wanted to be a crime writer because that was what I loved to read. And that's what I wanted to do, and I thought there were ways of taking that form to greater dimensions, and it was books that had that greater dimension that inspired me to want to be a crime writer. So that was when I was 19, and then when I was 35, that was when I first held a book I had written in my hand. So a lot had happened in those 16 years. And this was a moment that, if it had not happened to me, I was sure wouldn't be standing here tonight, which at the moment doesn't seem like such a bad thing. But when I just made that decision, I wanted to be a crime writer. I huddled with my parents and told them, revealed this to them, and we came up with a plan or an idea that might lead to the moment that I would be able to take a shot at that. And that was to go into journalism and get a press pass and get to crime scenes, hang out in police stations, hang out in criminal courtrooms, and I'd be able to observe the world that I wanted to write in fiction. And so I did that, and I did that for 14 years. And all the while I was doing it, I was on my own time writing fiction. There were some people who read my stories who thought I was writing fiction at the newspaper, but that I wasn't. I was really separating these lives, and at night I would write, and on weekends I would write. And over time I wrote my first novel, and I was not set in Los Angeles as all my books are now. I was actually writing for my hometown paper in South Florida, a state all the way 3,000 miles away from California. And it was based somewhat on a true story that I had written about as a reporter. And I worked on it for a couple years, and when it was done, I read it, and I decided that no other person should ever read that story. And I put it in a drawer, and later I put it in a box, and it somehow has disappeared, and that's really what it deserved. But it was, I wasn't bereft, I wasn't depressed. It was all part of the learning process. And I started it again, and I started another one, another story based on something I had written as a reporter about a kid who faked his kidnapping, and the detective who figured it out. And I wrote a novel based on that over about 2 more years. And when I read that, it was a lot better than the first one, but it also should not have been read by anyone else, not even my mother. And because she wanted to read it, but I wouldn't let her read it. And it got the same fate. And that was when I kind of went through my winter of discontent, and I had to try to figure out what I was missing. And I had good stories in these books, good framework of stories. And I'm a voracious reader of crime fiction, and I was comparing it to stuff that was being published and stuff that I loved and stuff that I didn't love even. And I just knew it was missing something. And I didn't know what it was. And, so I went through and it had taken a lot of time. And I was married. We were wanting to have a family. But I knew I couldn't have a kid, help raise a kid, while I was spending 4 or 5 nights a week writing and 1 day on the weekend. Even though I was living in the same house as my wife, it was like we had 1 day a week together. And so it was a big sacrifice. And so I really had to weigh, do I keep doing this? Maybe I'm not the person who should be writing novels. And this is a very interesting job I have anyway, so maybe that's what it should be. And so I took some time off from writing fiction as I was thinking about all this. And on my job, I was the crime reporter for kind of a small town, medium-sized town. About 300,000 people lived in it. And I had grown up there, and I knew a lot of people and was very comfortable. And I got this opportunity to spend a week with the homicide squad. They were having a very busy year. This was in the 80s. This is when all the cocaine was flooding into Miami and violence was spreading through the state of Florida. And we were just an hour's ride north of Miami, so we got our fair share of violence in the town I grew up in. It's called Fort Lauderdale. And so the homicides were way up. And that was a news story. And went in and lobbied the police chief to let me inside the homicide squad to see how they work. And I would write a long magazine story for the Sunday magazine of the paper. And I got that approved. And, this was in the 80s. There weren't cell phones. There was not the same kind of technology involved in media or law enforcement as there is today, obviously. So I was given a pager, and the head of the squad was a guy named, improbably enough, Sergeant Hurt. And my instructions were you would have full access, but you were to be attached at the hip to Sergeant Hurt so you don't mess up any crime scenes, you don't get in the way. And it will last 7 days, exactly 7 days. And if there's no murders, that's too bad. But if there are murders, you'll get to see them. You'll get to see the investigations. And so I did that, and it started Sunday to Saturday. And on Sunday afternoon, I'm watching football, American football, and the pager goes off, and I'm called to a scene, and I call up Sergeant Hurt, and he says, yeah, we have a murder. He gives me the address. He says, wear old clothes, and then he hangs up on me. And then so I show up at the murder scene, and it's somebody who's been found murdered in his apartment, and he's been there about a week. And that's why he wanted me to wear old clothes, because you never get the smell out of your clothes, which is what I learned that day. And as we go in there, Sergeant Hurt, who wasn't really happy that I was there, but the police chief made him take me on, whispered in my ear, he said that of course, that all smell is particulate. You're smelling, what creates the sense of smell is microscopic particulates hitting your nasal passages. So if you smell a dead body, you're breathing a dead body, which was a great thing to hear as I was going in. And so I got to watch a crime scene being worked and the interactions between detectives and so forth. And at one point, when it was safe enough, or okay, I guess you'd say, to go up to the body, Sergeant Hurt went up to the body. He wore glasses, and he squatted down next to the body like this and was looking at it. He took off his glasses, and he put them in his mouth like this. And he was just looking at it. He didn't say anything to anyone, and then he eventually got up. And so I, took furious notes, and I was also thinking this could be useful if I ever write a third novel, or attempt to, what I'm seeing. And that was great. And then 2 nights later, in the middle of the night, my pager goes off again, and I call Sergeant Hurt and says, we have another one. And this was a person who had just come out of a bar. Bar closed at 2 a.m., and he left the bar at closing time and was walking to his car, and someone drove by and shot him. And so we had an outdoor crime scene, and we were there for a long time, all through the night. And at one point, when it was okay and the forensics had cleared out, Sergeant Hurt went up to the body and looked at it, and he put his glasses in his mouth like this. So finally, 2 days later, the pager goes off again, and there's another murder. So it's weird. I mean, that's a sad thing. Murders are bad, and it's awful for society, but I was so lucky. There were 3 murders on the week I was there. And this guy was someone who was shot in his car, and people had tried to help him and save him, and they pulled him out of his car, so he was on the ground with his feet still in the car when he died. And we did the same thing, and at some point, Sergeant Hurt, like that. And so eventually, at that scene, I said, what are you doing, praying? Are you promising this person that you're going to find out who did it? What's that all about? And he said, the police chief said I had to have you on this week-long thing, but I don't have to tell you anything about that. And he walked away. He wouldn't tell me what that was about. And so it was, I was a reporter for 14 years, and those 7 days were the best of my whole career, the most informative, the most meaningful. And I started relationships with 4 or 5 homicide detectives, and we were there when they were calling their kids and saying, I'm not going to get home. And I got a real idea what it's like to do that job, and it certainly has informed all the work I've done since. But on the last day, on Saturday, I sat in Sergeant Hurt's office, and I was just kind of wrapping stuff up. Of the 3 murders, they solved 2 during the week, and one I check on it every now and then, is the guy who came out of the bar. It's never been solved, but they got 2 out of 3, which was not bad considering all that was going on those days. And so anyway, I'm sitting in his office, and I always remember, oddly enough, he had this framed photo of 2 hands that had been severed, and they were in a crime scene, and for some reason he framed them and put them on his wall. And they were kind of behind him, so like if you looked up from him, he was like, oh, that's weird. But anyway, 3 of those days we had worked through the night, and no one got any sleep. And at some point, Sergeant Hurt took off his glasses. He's sitting behind his desk and throws them on his desk so he can go like this and wipe his eyes. And then I saw in this, the hard plastic of the earpiece, there was a really deep groove that his teeth had made. And I realized that when he was having that moment of communing with the body, his jaws were clenched so tight they were cutting into the hard plastic of his glasses. And all at once I knew that's what I didn't have in my novels. This moment, or this aspect of what connects a person with their mission, with their job. It said so much about what the job meant to him, what the job did to him. It said so much about his dedication, his relentlessness. And I do think there was a bit of a prayer and a bit of a promise in what he was doing. And all that while I'm sitting there, and I'm as exhausted as him, I kind of knew I'm going to try a 3rd novel, and I'm going to find a way of getting Sergeant Hurt's glasses into that novel. And that became the novel where Harry Bosch was born, and it got published. And the first one to read it was my mother. Thank you very much.